to another stream. So sorry for the audio quality first and foremost because I don't know, my mic just stopped working, stopped connecting to the computer. I've been trying to figure it out for like the past hour, troubleshooting, changing wires, trying to update the firmware. Nothing's working. So c'est la vie. And I'm just gonna have to use my computer audio. So hopefully it doesn't sound too bad. But most importantly, thank you so much for all the people that have subscribed recently. It went from like 40 something subscribers to over 100 subscribers in a matter of like a day or two. Thanks to this man right here, Dr. Gregory Sattler, who shouted me out on his social media after after YouTube sent him a copyright infringement kind of alert that I've been streaming his videos. So I'm super grateful that he is not only open and looking and enjoys me doing this, but has sent a lot of people over. So I'm super excited to learn alongside everybody. So I'm actually streaming this on YouTube today. Hopefully you get the alert. I'm not sure if anybody actually clicked the bell or anything like that to alert themselves that this is available. Maybe I can try to, yeah, I'm gonna try to post this on my community channel real quick just to see if anybody might come. I doubt it, but I now have more people on my YouTube than I do on my Twitch. So let's do that real quick. But as I do this, if you call back, oh look, yeah, it pops up here. Interesting, nice. It doesn't put a. I'm not sure if I can put a screenshot or something. Let me first. Let me put this here. Let's see this. I have to copy that because I can never spell phenomenology. Oops. Oh, maybe I should have put the link. Look at that. 102 subscribers, y'all. That's crazy. Thank y'all so much for subscribing. Those that did. Might wait a while. Let me pause this. I'll wait a while. I'll come back in a few minutes. Can I actually pause the stream or will it start over? Um, I should have I should have practiced this, but there's no way to actually practice this before. Like I tried to stream through YouTube directly, but it won't let me. There's no options to share my screen. And then I tried StreamYards. I just wanted to try that out. Um, that didn't work as well. Hopefully, let me cut some of this out when I actually upload it. Okay, here we go. Thumbnail. I don't know why you can't do any of this beforehand. Do this platform here, Melon app. We kind of falling behind. Okay, okay. Oh, it's at the top now. Is it? Ah, it's freezing on me. Oh crap! I'm doing too much stuff on my little itty bitty Mac. Okay, here we go. Change the save. Awesome. Go back to my channel and see if it uploaded. Oh, no, it did not. Oh well. We're just gonna go for it with it, I suppose. Yeah. Let's show the chat just in case somebody pops in, and go ahead and get this started. Or should I wait? I feel like I should wait. Well, meanwhile, while we wait, we recall the last section. We were talking about, yeah, this whole metaphor for the time he's living in, Hegel, early 1800s, late 1700s, of it being a point of massive change, right? And that point being, he had a metaphor comparing this science and a lot of what's going on at that time to calling science as like a baby, right? A baby that's crowning, that's about to come out, has like this immediacy of something new about to happen. But like a baby, it might take a while for it to mature, right? Um, and we kind of reflected on that moment because in very in pretty much many ways we can call this era of where we live now, 2021, as another one of these eras where you have a lot of massive change going on. And you can even say science, even though science has accomplished a lot over the last 200 years since Hegel, and we kind of make an argument that looking back at Hegel's time, that's not even the heyday of science. Like a lot of the scientific advancements and stuff like that we know today has pretty much came after Hegel, right? From Newton to Einstein and all these other amazing folks in the 1900s and all this other stuff. These amazing advancements in nuclear physics, and biology and genetics and ecology, chemistry, all these other sciences. They really popped off after Hegel. So you can easily make an argument that Hegel, you weren't living to that special of a time. But no, it was special, with the French Revolution and all this other stuff going on. Um, but I suppose that's kind of the point too. Like in every era, we feel like our time, our modern day, present day time is massively changing. It's like a um, some immediate, um, huge, monumental inflection point or something, right? So it's just really interesting to hear Hegel talking about that in his time, and I'm really looking forward to see what this section is talking about if he continues that metaphor, um, of seeing science and philosophy as like a baby, a newborn being birthed. So yeah, I waited long enough. I don't know if nobody joins, but they'll see the recording. So let's go ahead and get this started. It's already 10 minutes in. Hopefully I can cut all this out. So sorry. And here we go.
While the initial appearance of this new world is, to begin with, only the whole veiled in its simplicity or the general foundation of the whole, The wealth of previous existence is still present to consciousness and memory.
Mm-hmm.
Consciousness misses in the newly emerging shape its former range and specificity of content, and even more the articulation of the form, whereby distinctions are securely defined and stand arrayed in their fixed relations.
Let's look at that. Yeah. Consciousness misses in the newly emerging shape its former range and specificity of content, and even more the articulation of form, whereby distinctions are securely defined and stand arrayed in their fixed relations. Goodness, that's thick. Let me see. It's saying here, consciousness misses in newly emerging shape its former range and specificity of content. Basically, talking about how the mind or the conscious kind of experience before is to my understanding has been assumed to be an intuitive understanding, right? And the previous form of consciousness was like this spiritual experience, religion, or this other type of experience, and even more the articulation of form, whereby distinctions are securely defined. So trying to explain that feeling, that experience of consciousness, was very difficult, right? At the same time, it was, or rather, even though it is difficult, you can say that it was securely defined in the terms of this fixed understanding of spiritualism, right? When you think about religion, and you think about when you think about the place or the way in which religion defines, consciousness or the conscious experience, is very much a limited kind of constrained box of like, oh yes, God gave you this feeling, the breath of life, or any of these types of things, and it really gets you to understand, and or rather to assume, a kind of fixed place in there. Oh, Sean, thank you very much for coming through. These remarks in the preface referring to contemporary philosophy and science went so far over my head before I read some commentary. Yeah. This is why I'm like watching and listening to Hegel. I'm sorry, goodness, Hegel. This is why I'm watching his explanations of it, because it helps a lot. I have no background in this stuff, so it really helps me to go through this, and it gives me the confidence to work through each sentence and each part of the words. If I did this by myself, if I just sat down and try to read it, I honestly would probably be like, I don't know, whatever, right? But slowing down and going through each paragraph, each sentence, trying to understand this myself, and then listening to him explain it and see how that compares with my explanation, it helps me to understand this a lot more. Hopefully, you get that as well through this. Let's continue.
Whereby distinctions are securely defined and stand arrayed in their fixed relations. Without such articulation, science lacks universal intelligibility and gives the appearance of being the esoteric possession of a few individuals. An esoteric possession, since it is yet only present in its notion or its inwardness. Of a few individuals, since its undiffused manifestation makes its existence something singular.
Oh, hold up. So, without such articulation, science lacks universal intelligibility. So what he was saying with the last part in terms of articulation was actually, I had that backwards, right? He wasn't talking about how religion, kind of rigidly defines spiritualism, but rather how science should securely define consciousness and things like that. So that's an interesting take. This actually reminds me of the problems of determinism, or rather mechanistic determinism, in that they had this understanding that everything could be explained, right? Everything could be explained through an analytical breakdown, where you get down to the what do you call it, the unbreakable elements, like the essence of the element, and or the what was that? Why am I missing that term? Basically, an element that can't be broken down any further, right? So there was very much that thought around that time span, and so that's why I kind of had it backwards, because I forget that science itself kind of assumed that we could understand the entire world and understand all of consciousness by analyzing everything and breaking it down to indisputable elements. But in reality, at least what we see today, there's a lot about the world, consciousness, and things like that that is inexplicable. So it's really interesting to see that shift through the ages as well. But yeah, he's saying here, it seems that science should have that articulation. Science should be able to explain something like consciousness in a way that makes it understandable and comprehensive, so that we can messing around with it. Otherwise, it gives the appearance of being esoteric position of a few individuals. So otherwise, yeah, I think this is kind of the relation to religion. Otherwise, these kind of spiritual people, these spiritual leaders are like the only ones who can talk anything about this crazy experience of consciousness. So it's very interesting to me.
Without such articulation, science lacks universal intelligibility. It gives the appearance of being the esoteric possession of a few individuals. An esoteric possession, since it is yet only present in its notion or its inwardness. Of a few individuals, since its undiffused manifestation makes its existence something singular. Only what is completely determined is at once exoteric, comprehensible, and capable of being learned and appropriated by all. The intelligible form of science is the way open and equally accessible to everyone. And consciousness, as it approaches science, justly demands that it be able to attain rational knowledge by way of the ordinary understanding. For the understanding is thought, the pure I as such. And what is intelligible is what is already familiar common to science and the unscientific consciousness alike, the latter through its having afforded direct access to the former.
Let me look up that word real quick. He said the exoteric. I don't even know that was a word. I'm guessing it's like esoteric is in terms of kind of above, kind of the position of a few people, of not something that not very many people understand, but exoteric, I guess, would be something that many people understand or something like that. Intended for likely to be understood by the general public. Yes, I did it. Yes, that's what it means, Jessica. All right, awesome. We'll get to work through that stuff. So yeah, the pure I, what is intelligible, is what is already familiar and common to science and the unscientific consciousness alike, the latter through its having afforded direct access to the former. Yeah. So by understanding things, we can better explain it, right? And we can help other people to explain it in a kind of religious, intuitive sense. If you have an intuitive sense of something, you can't really explain how something works. You just have to say, oh, you just have to experience it, right? I can't really, it's inexplicable. There's no words to it. You just have to be there. You just have to experience it. But no, saying with science, you got to break it down. Even something like consciousness that seems unscientific, that seems like you can't explain it. You can break it down. You can explain it. And in doing so, you can help other people to understand this thing. So I'm looking forward to how he's going to break this down. But this reminds me of the recent studies into self-actualization by folks like Maslow, all the way up to S.B. Kaufman. So I read his book called Transcendence: The New Science of Actualization, and it was basically breaking down like this conscious experience and how there are so many parts of being human, and you can call it our needs, in which very much speak to this conscious experience. And they even have like spiritual, transcendental experiences that they realize that many people need. Right? It's a very important need to have a transcendental experience, like a feeling of purpose, a feeling of connection with the one, or with like other people and stuff like that. It sounds kind of new age, woo woo stuff, but they were able to study this, right? They were able to track this in terms of data and all this other stuff. And the way they break that down reminds me of the same idea here. So that's very interesting.
There are two main things going on in this section. One of them, which I already have sort of sketched out on the board, has to do with this contrast between two different ways of looking at the new world that's developing. The new world and the old world are kind of interfused. And I don't want to linger on that too long because I want to say what the second thing is. The second thing is Hegel is going to begin to lay out some of the desiderata, the criteria for what is actually going to count as scientific knowledge systematically developed. And he's going to introduce a new portion of that criterion. So far, we've got that, it has to be systematic, has to take account of itself. There's a number of different things, but this is going to be something new. But first, let's look at what's actually going on here. So he talks about consciousness as being caught between two different polarities. And I'm actually going to begin with the second one. He begins bringing up this notion of a wealth of previous experience. And what we're talking about there is, we've been exploring this
I
new
gotta speed
world,
you up a little bit.
The metaphor of the baby, the child, and the old world that is tottering, that you can tell is beginning to disintegrate through this qualitative leap that's taking place through quantitative growth. Why are we still holding on to that? Well, it still has a great attraction for consciousness in general, if we want to think about it in terms of society or cultures, and for individual consciousnesses. This is part of what in phenomenological terms used later on we would call the life world, or Hegel will actually call substantial life later on in his
phenomenology. I mentioned that a little bit before too.
And what is so attractive about this? Well,
I'd love to know. I want to get more interaction in the streams and the comments for people to listen back. What do you think is a substantial life? For those that read this and for those that have not, what do you think is that Hegel means by the substantial life and vice versa by the it's insubstantial life? I would love to know what folks think about that. I have some ideas about that, but we'll keep that for later.
There's a wealth of content, as he calls it, a not just wealth, but a range and specificity of content. So the things that we're familiar with, think about, for example, the transformations that are taking place today with online education. This is a prime example. When online education first began, and I would say, here's the dirty little secret about it, for the most part, still today, people would transpose the categories that they already knew. They thought you could just upload a bunch of content, and you might be changing the form slightly, but really we're wedded to the 15-week semester or the 10-week semester or the 12-week semester, whatever it is that we're used to, and we got to do grades in a certain way. And how are we going to get around the fact that we don't have a lot of information?
Let me read your comment, Sean, because whenever I hear about education system, I go on a whole rampage about that stuff. So I take it to mean uncomprehended life, or life not reflected on philosophically and devoted to substance. And what do you mean by substance? But yeah, I think I understand where you're going with here. Uncomprehended life. Yeah, I would love to know what you mean by substance. Let's break this down a little bit further. Because I think it might be related to, kind of what he said the mission of philosophy is, right, in the very beginning, about how it's a dialectic. I love that word so much. About how it's about the grappling of things, right? So if you kind of pursue that path, or just think about what it means to live a substantial life, or you can even call it a fulfilling life. What is that? What does that really mean? What does that look like? What does that feel like? How would you explain that? I think that's an interesting thought to have.
Interaction, discussion.
I'm sorry for the background noise. Again, I have no mic, so there's no it just, you hear my background. I have a large family. You're gonna hear them in the kitchen always making noise, so apologies.
Forums, that'll substitute for that. And discussion forums are like face-to-face interaction. You see where this is going, right? People are used to things that actually work, that they have experience with, and they may be not working as well as one thinks. One can tell oneself all sorts of stories about that.
The Dark One. Welcome, the Dark One. I know this is unrelated, but I'm reading Nicomachean. Is that Nicomachean? Nicomachean Ethics, and it's really rough, fucking rough. I feel like I'm not getting it at all. Yeah, I have no idea what that is. Let's look it up. Oh, by Aristotle. Interesting. Yeah, I'm actually not looked up into Aristotle or many of their literature. I need to do that. Name normally given to Aristotle's best known work in ethics. The work plays a preeminent role in defining Aristotelian ethics since the 10 books. 10 books, goodness. Originally separate schools. Then it's based on most. It's interesting. Yeah, I might have to look into it. The soul's participation in eternal, a union between the soul's rational faculty and the nous imparts intelligibility to the cosmos. Yeah, that's already kind of crazy. It might not be wrong though, because even though they have this idea of the soul, and I personally don't believe in that, the soul, especially nowadays as we have a better understanding of consciousness. But I do think by kind of retroactively, looking at kind of translating the soul to consciousness, we can understand and we can kind of translate those those thoughts and that knowledge into present day, you know, conversation. So yeah, I'll have to check that out. Thank you.
But at least they have some specificity, and at least they have some structure that we understand. He talks about form going along with content, and this is a duad or dyad that's going to show up a lot in Hegelian thought. Not only do we have range and specificity of content, we have the articulation of form, the articulateness. So form gives us distinctions. It helps us anchor those distinctions. It helps us differentiate things from each other. The content gets to be content by being structured by form. So we have this content in the form of the old world, and we realize that the old world has cracks in it. It's not our conception of it isn't fully adequate, and there may be great bifurcations where we understand.
See you, son. Sean says, true, I should have specified. I think substance is very broadly the objective content of philosophy, or everything we articulate in our account of reality. Yeah. I think that makes sense in terms of what is this thing that we call life? Like, what is this thing that we call reality? And that's why I love what Hegel says in the beginning, where we kind of assume that there's so much about life that you can't explain just because it feels inexplicable. But like when you take philosophy as a science, when you treat philosophy as a science, as a comprehensive system, right, that allows you to understand all these inexplicable things, then yeah, I think that's what substance is. It's like it gives a substantialness to thought, and to be able to think about these things and be able to pull them from the kind of nebulous space of intuitive experience and bringing it down to like a practical everyday use case. So yeah, I definitely think that's a good track to take. Have you read the Anima? I only just started reading Philosophy in Depth. Yeah, I feel y'all. I'm just starting with it. This is my first actual philosophy book, so I'm taking all y'all reading lists. I'll put that on mine as well.
Understand the world of work this way, the world of the family this way, the world of religion this way, and the different systems don't map onto each other, but at least they have what appears to be a sort of richness to them. By contrast, the New World, what's being developed, where the dialectic is going, is merely the general foundation of the whole, or as you said before, the notion of the whole, and the notion in its primary undeveloped state, where it's really a universal that risks being an abstract, empty universal. So this is going to bring up the issue of science. He says, without the kind of articulation that we have over here, science, which is what we want over here, can't really be what it's supposed to be. It's going to lack universal intelligibility. And it gives the appearance of being the esoteric possession of a few individuals. This is going to lead us to the second part now. So
that's why we
want to think about the nature of what Hegel has been calling science.
I think Hegel's substance draws a lot from Spinoza, but of course differs significantly too. Yeah, I've heard a lot about Spinoza, but I have no idea who that is. So got to do homework. Worth checking out if you're looking to delve deeper into Aristotle's philosophy of soul. Definitely. Yeah. This is great reading list material. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Science wants to develop itself in a certain way. It wants to unfold itself. And when a science comes on the scene, a new way of knowing, a new way of articulating things, it appears to be the esoteric possession of a few individuals. So what does all this mean? So esoteric is opposed to exoteric. Esoteric means that it's coming from the word for inside. Exoteric would be the outside, the shell. So think of something where there's a story being told, and the story is actually supposed to illustrate a greater point. So there's an exoteric meaning, like take a fable, right? Aesop wrote all these moralizing tales where, for instance, the fox, or the dog, we'll use the one about the dog. The dog has a bone in its mouth, it goes along, it sees another dog, which is really itself, in the water, and it barks at that dog and it loses the bone.
I never heard that fable.
Okay, well, that's a neat story. That's the exoteric portion of the story. What's the esoteric inside moral maybe keep your mouth shut. Or when you've got something good, hold on to it and don't worry about who else there is that has something similar. There could be more than one esoteric meaning. But what Hegel's calling science risks becoming something merely esoteric. And why? He says, an esoteric possession sense it's yet present only in its notion or in its inwardness. So insofar as we're just talking about the beginning of a notion, the beginning of a concept, the beginning of a begriff, it's esoteric. It hasn't been fully developed yet. You have to be in the know in order to make sense of it. Why is it the
And you said, from what I've seen, Satler's videos on Preface help bridge the gap with the many Spinoza references. So no worries. Awesome. Yeah. I like that he tends to do that. He does, still mention a lot of different things like, oh yeah, he's talking about this and that. But he does also, help to explain some of that. I'm not sure if he kind of, at least in the beginning, realizes how many people watch this that have no philosophy history whatsoever. But yeah, he does. He does a great job of doing that. That's why, once again, it's great to watch these sorts of things and to react to it. It's great to learn alongside.
Possession of just a few individuals, because he says its undiffused manifestation makes its appearance something singular. So now you might say, well, what does that mean? Its undiffused appearance. Its undiffused manifestation makes its existence something singular. It's not happening everywhere. There are selected places. So, think, for example, about some of the things that are bursting on the scene at this time. One of the things that people are always, I'll take two of them. One of them I brought up before. Another one is one that I haven't talked much about. So think about mindfulness and how everybody's talking about that.
Yep.
And, if you pin them down on it, it's often kind of vague about what exactly it means. Turns out it's sort of like meditation practices from some Eastern philosophies, although you can find a lot of these in Western philosophies, light, that is stripped away. And, you're supposed to focus on the present and on your sensations and not try to bring a lot of things to the experience. Really, you're doing phenomenology, but you're doing phenomenology light. Now, is that something that everybody's doing? On a certain level, you have to be doing that or you can't actually be conscious. But as a movement, it's not something super widespread. That's why you can have gurus that lead workshops about this sort of thing. Same thing with think about neuroscience. This incredible burgeoning of all sorts of fields. Neuroscience is going to transform this. Neuroscience tells us about that. Morality, dating, business, education. Everybody's got to talk about neuroscience, and they produce these great scans of the brain. Now, can you do brain scans all the time?
No.
As it turns out, no. You can only do them under extremely.
Real quick, I just want to share this awesome news that they did a really great study called interbrain synchronization, and they were able to show that when people are working on a task, their brain synchronizes on that task, right? So you can look this up here. Already posted in the comments here. So their brain actually synchronizes like the wavelengths or whatever is going on in your brain so that you can better collaborate. And it only happens when you're actually cooperating, when you're collaborating on a task, not when you're doing different tasks or the same task in the same room. So that was a super interesting study. And they're trying to do one to see if it also works remotely, right? Because that tells a lot about what's going on. If it does not work remotely, then that means there's some type of non-physical, communication going on, right? But if it does happen remotely, that's even crazier. So I'm super curious to see, what happens there. But this kind of left field, but it is related to neuroscience, and it's kind of that similar idea. It's like esoteric knowledge that only people know if you're in the know, if you're like in that field, if you're doing that research, if you're, all that stuff. And then much of it gets kind of disseminated to exoteric, right? To other people through all these different articles and workshops and all this other stuff. So very interesting.
Narrow circumstances. People got to sit still. You got to do the imaging. Now, the imaging that we can do is really quite cool. And so within those very particular niche experience ranges, we can actually learn quite a bit. I mean, now you've gotten to the point where you can like map out not just, like big portions of the brain and whether they're lighting up or not lighting up. You can actually see what's connected to what. So, but is that widespread? No, that's really just the province of a few individuals. These are what we call nascent sciences. And they may, in fact, turn out to measure up to the hype that they bring about, or they may not actually turn out to be that way. They may turn out to be the new phrenology. If you know the history of that pseudo discipline, we have to wait and see. It has to become articulate. It has to no longer be the province of a few individuals. It has to be no longer esoteric. Hegel says that only what is completely determined is at once as exoteric, comprehensible, capable of being learned and apprehended.
Right. Are you in STEM? Sort of. I'm in design, learning UX design, so it's kind of in the middle. It's technically technology. It's not coding or anything like that, but it uses a lot of psychology and understanding of technology and things like that to help people, help coders, help companies design better stuff. So yeah, definitely. I think basically I am.
That's what science tends towards. It's open. It's manifest. It can be learned by all, at least in theory, perhaps not actually in practice. In our own society, you have to tear people away from Netflix and other things that are occupying them on the internet and whatever other occupations they have in order to get them to do that. But in theory, a lot of things could be learned by anybody who wants to apply themselves to it. And that's what science tends towards. So he says, the intelligible form of science is the way open and equally accessible to everyone. So this is a very democratic, very egalitarian concept of science. It's not actually lowering science to, the lowest common denominator, saying, well, you got to make it so simple that even somebody who doesn't do any cultivation, any mental work can get it. Because that's not going to work.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about sophisticated, systematic conceptions of reality here that do require some development of the person. But they should be able to be available to everybody. So he says, consciousness as it approaches science justly demands that it be able to attain to rational knowledge by way of the ordinary understanding, by way of the, enfranchised ordinary understanding, the disencumbered ordinary understanding. For the understanding is thought, the pure eye is such, and so it should be able to take it in and make sense of it. The new world that we're beginning with in this passage is not yet at that point, and taking on the determinacy that the old world had with form and content, that's going to be an integral part of the development of science, of philosophy as scientific.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'd love to know, are you in
science in its early stages?
What y'all doing? What are your careers? What are your goals, interests? What brought you to learn something like this crazy thick book? Curious to know.
When it has attained neither its completeness of detail nor perfection of form, is vulnerable to criticism. But it would be just as unjust for criticism to strike at the very heart of science as it is untenable to refuse to honor the demand for its further development. This polarization seems to be the Gordian knot with which scientific culture is at present struggling and which it does not properly understand. One side boasts of its wealth of material and intelligibility. The other side at least scorns this intelligibility and flaunts its immediate rationality and divinity.
Ooh, goodness. I think that's very important right there, because an interesting thing to remember, right, is that in the 1800s and even up until the 1950s or so, most people did not go to higher education, right? Higher education was like an elitist type of thing. And most people were losing my words. I couldn't read, right? Couldn't read and write. Whether it was America or anywhere else in the world, most people did not read and write. And so many of this stuff about philosophy and all these books and all this other stuff what science is doing was only really done in the space of the elites, right? So it's even, and you still see this today a little bit, but it's even more apparent then, right? This Gordian knot of where scientists and science wants to be understood by people and be respected as something that can give people knowledge and understanding of everything, but at the same time, it's a thing of the elites, right? They don't really want it to be understood because they allude to all these other books and things that most people don't read or don't understand and all this other stuff, and they write in very flowery language. So it's like it's meant to kind of be up there, and I think that's a very interesting thing to remember. Sean, I work in marketing PR. Came to Hegel after reading Marx. Interesting. Yeah, I got to read Marx too. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, marketing PR is interesting, man. It's interesting. I would love to talk to you about marketing because I have a whole. I'm not sure if you see my other videos, but I have a whole thing about marketing. Um, the dark one. I'm joining the labor course soon, but I started reading philosophy because I got tired of having my worldview be at the whim of the YouTube algorithm. So I picked up a few books, and here I am. Yeah, I definitely understand that. Like, oh my gosh, it's so important to really curate your algorithms, your whether it's YouTube or any other social media, because it's so easy to just fall into some crap. And it's funny too because Hegel talks about this earlier, where he says some people basically use uh, philosophy as like edification, as like, ooh, look at me, I'm smart, and I feel like a lot of YouTubers do that. Like a lot, a lot of areas in YouTube are full of people like that who just throw at you some big words and big books and all this other stuff, and it's really just to seem smart, but they don't have a comprehensive system of the world or understanding, and they don't try to help other people understand the world in a more cohesive way. So that's another reason why I really enjoy reading this and learning about this stuff. But yeah, I definitely understand that. But yeah, Sean, we'll have to figure out a time for that. um, I'll probably reach out because I really like to have these kind of conversations. I have that stuff with my friends all the time, so we'll get into it.
Even if the former side is reduced to silence, whether by the force of truth alone or the blustering of the other, and even if in respect to fundamentals it feels itself outmatched, it is by no means satisfied regarding the said demands, for they are justified, but not fulfilled.
Mm. Oh, let's look at that again. That was another bar. Even if the former side is reduced to silence, whether by the force of truth alone or blustering of the other, and even if in the respective fundamentals it feels itself outmatched, it is by no means satisfied regarding the said demands, for they are justified but not fulfilled. Right? So it's like the whole importance of philosophy, right, is like what you said before, is getting out there and explaining things, understanding the comprehensive truth. Um, and this is like it's justified to want to do these things and to want to be intelligible or even esoteric in a way, because it takes a lot of effort to build up to this. But when you're not right, when it's not a comprehensive system to where you can explain to other people as well, it's not really fulfilled. You don't have that sense of understanding the divine, or the phenomenology, or however they call it. um I think that's what he's saying here, right? I don't know, something about this just hits me.
No means satisfied regarding the said demands, for they are justified, but not fulfilled. Its silence stems only half from the triumph of its opponent and half from the boredom and indifference which tends to result from the continual awakening of expectations through unfulfilled promises.
Mm. So yeah, like that part, I think that last part is talking about, um again, when you're filling in that gap of the divine, right, it leaves a void. And when you don't really explain how this works, whether it's your belief in God, or your belief in nationalism, or your belief in this political stance, or whatever, right, whatever your God is, whatever your and intuitive understanding of life or stuff is, right, if the comprehensive explanation of that magic doesn't really explain things, then it feels like it doesn't feel like enough. And so you kind of are become unsatisfied with it. And maybe you go back to that initial thing, that initial intuitive experience. So
To result from the continual awakening of expectations through unfulfilled promises. In this paragraph as well, we've got a kind of two-step going on where The first part of the paragraph is setting out a kind of problematic, and then the second part is bringing out some other aspects of that very problematic. In this case, it's going to center on what Hegel calls a Gordian knot, and I'll tell you about that in just a moment. First, I want to look at what he's actually saying at the beginning. So he says that science early on, science as it's not fully developed, is vulnerable to what? To criticism, to somebody dismissing it, to somebody saying, well, you're not truly scientific, or you don't really grasp reality as such. There's things you're missing, to dismissal altogether. This is not the way to go.
I'm sorry, but it's so funny because we see it today, like with vaccines, right? With 5G technology, with GMOs and all this other stuff. When people don't really understand the science, or when the science is very early, like with gene editing, people are like, oh, what's blah blah blah. It's hard to trust it. It's hard to understand it. It's hard to communicate it. And so it's like it is kind of, I can see that what he's talking about. It's like a battle. It's like it's losing on one end because people don't want to trust it and don't want to go through the process of understanding it. They kind of want to dismiss it. But at the same time, it's winning because it's discovering something new, right? It's in a whole new field, to which the more it matures in that field and the more it is able to explain of that field, then the more we can do in that area, right? So it's a constant back and forth. It's a tug of war. It's a balance. I feel like the dark one says, I feel like it's also that people are being lied to about new tech too. Yeah, and that's a problem. That's why I want to talk to you, Sean, about marketing, because I'm like, why are so many technologies marketed such that it makes you feel or think that, oh, it's gonna solve all the problems, it's gonna do this and do that. I understand some of the psychology behind that, but goodness, man, it just creates so much more problems, because then people lose trust afterwards when it doesn't deliver, that sort of thing. And I know that's kind of bad marketing. It's kind of like in design, we call that dark patterns. So I guess that's kind of like dark patterns for marketing. But yeah, that's when people lie about like the effectiveness of certain technologies or science or anything, right? It just breaks that system of trust, and it breaks that that desire to understand and to look back at this science later on. But that's another problem too, right? It's like for people who don't go through the process of understanding science, then you are kind of led to believe that when if you see one thing that's false, if you were lied to, for instance, about certain technology, then you tend to dismiss everything afterwards, even though good science continues, right? They might be wrong with something, but then later on they figure out something else and they correct it, right? But if you just distrust all science, because of an earlier slight, then you don't benefit from that improvement of what they did later on. So we have to figure out, like, how do we get people to, to accept that, yeah, sometimes things go wrong, sometimes people make mistakes, sometimes they lie, but the process is still a process, right? It will still improve, it will still get better, we'll still learn more. The dark one. Not just that, but for example, with the vaccines, talking heads like Tucker Carlson actively lie about it too. Yeah, I honestly don't know too much about it. I don't look at the talking heads. I don't, because I honestly don't trust a lot of these people. So I just look at the science. I have some scientist friends who actually worked on vaccines and stuff like that, and that's where I stay. I don't look at the talking heads because they gonna talk about anything. So I got to be careful around that. But yeah, I feel you. I definitely understand that.
And Hegel says that that's unfair. Why is that unfair? Well, because science, by its very nature, and what he's meaning by science, remember, is not just what we tend to think of as the scientists in the labs and Stephen Hawking and people like that. What he means, nor is it just popularizations of science, the people who do the Sage on the Stage thing and do TED Talks. What he means is this process of trying to develop rigorous, systematic knowledge that can actually take account of itself and that can make sense out of the historical process by which it developed. It's a big undertaking.
Yeah.
So science,
Sean,
particular.
Says, oh no, I misclicked. There we go. Okay. Sean says, "Yep, I think this connects to Hegel's apparent conviction that science prevails in its time by virtue of its adherence to the notion concept." Yeah, definitely. I think he's going to get more into that. But this, being consistent with, having a good system of working towards something really goes a long way to winning in the end. And the dark one says, yeah, my girlfriend's a bio major and she's helped me so much with treading the bullshit. Yeah, yeah, that's necessary. Eccentric cast, eccentric Haste. I'm not sure how you say your name, so sorry. But welcome to the stream. Dude, you're helping me understand Hegel. Thanks. No problem, man. It's thank Dr. Sadler here, because he's doing the hard work here. I'm just, putting my own interpretations and spins on it. But thank you for learning alongside us, because I think this is a beautiful aspect of this. So yeah, thank you very much.
To dismissal altogether, this is not the way to go. And Hegel says that that's unfair. Why is that unfair? Well, because science, by its very nature, and what he's meaning by science, remember, is not just what we tend to think of as the scientists in the labs and Stephen Hawking and people like that. What he means, nor is it just the popularizations of science, people who do the Sage on the Stage thing and do TED Talks. What he means is this process of trying to develop rigorous, systematic knowledge that can actually take account of itself and that can make sense out of the historical process by which it developed.
Right.
It's a big undertaking. So science is not complete. He says it's not complete in its details. That has to do with content. That means that for any given point in time, there's more that it has to take in. And
this is such an important part, right? There's always more to the story. Like, people all the time kind of almost poo-poo on scientists when they speak kind of cautiously, and they say there's no current evidence of this, that, and the other, and they're saying, so you're saying, there's other stuff. The reason scientists speak like that, and any person that has this understanding of a scientific mindset, is because that the facts today might not be the facts tomorrow, right? The things might change, and that's okay. You fully expect it to change, and you should. Now, this is what makes science so beneficial to humanity, ahead of things like intuitive understanding of the world or something like that. Because when you just assume that you can have a complete understanding of the world, then you don't open yourself up to new facts, right? You don't open yourself up to new knowledge and new discoveries and stuff like that, and you don't keep your mind open to these new things that come up. So yeah, it's so important to realize that science is not complete. There's always more to the story. There's always more to learn. And it's good that we have that. Some people, I think too many people want science to be complete, to be a complete exclamation of XYZ in order for them to believe it. That's not science, right? If you want to do science, if you want to have a scientific mindset, you have to accept this, that things change. There's always more to learn, and it takes a process, to develop, those building blocks of knowledge. So yeah, and I think it's going to get into that with the not perfect thing, like you can make mistakes and all this other stuff. So I love it.
You can think about this. There's even the sciences that have been around for quite a while, like say biology. They're still discovering new species. As a matter of fact, newer sciences like the branch that studies viruses just recently discovered these large viruses that operate in a somewhat different way. And when that happens, when they discover these, they're like, I think we got to do some rethinking of the very nature of our activity, of what it is that we're studying. So sometimes finding new content isn't just a matter of filling in gaps that you had. It actually says, well, I think there might be more gaps out there. We're not even really quite sure where the gaps are. And that leads us to
Sean, he says, I think mindset is important to keep in mind too. The preface is, after all, on scientific cognition. Exactly. Mindset is extremely important. That's what determines, like you said, that scientific cognition, like how you think about science, how you think about the world, how you think about developing a system of understanding. Yeah, definitely, that mindset is super important.
The second part, science is not perfect in its form, in what we were calling articulation. Remember, science, in order to really be science, it has to articulate the content that it has in a way that actually does justice to what it is that it's attempting to study and its own self as the one who's studying it. That's a big order. So science is going to be continually developing. This is the natural course. It's not a process that you just finish up right away, and it's not a process that comes up with its own scientific method, which then it applies cookie cutter style to everything that's out there. That's actually bad science. Scientific method has had to be reconceived over time. And if science, as philosophy, is really going to be truly scientific and talk about the totality, that means that it has to become adequate to the things that it's studying, even if those seem to be non-scientific at first. That means that science has to stretch, to use a term that Hegel's.
That's something I recently learned too, is that the scientific method itself has changed and does change and should change, right? Because in school you kind of taught this is the scientific method, this is the way to do science, right? But in actuality, over the years and depending on the subject, the scientific method changes. It depends on what you're studying and how you're studying it and all this other stuff, like psychology. A huge part of the problems of reproducibility in psychology is because the scientific method they were using is kind of prone to bias and all this other stuff, and it assumes that you can explain a lot of psychological understandings by reducing it to a singular cause or a singular thing outside of an environment, when in reality the environment of human society and social kind of nature changes the behaviors of people, right? So you have to study psychology in a different way than most other sciences. You have to look at it from a more meta sense or a more ethnographic sense and things like that. The Dark One says you should read The Nature of Scientific Revolution by Thomas Kuhn. All right, definitely. I'll put that on the list. Having a list on the side here, so writing all these things down. But yeah, thank y'all once again. This is incredible. This is what I love doing this. Here we go.
Not easy.
All right.
So Hegel says science needs further development. It requires that. And so to criticize it on that basis is a little bit unfair, because that would be sort of like saying a child who is not yet an adult is therefore wrong for not being an adult. No, it's part of the natural process is the further development that has to take place.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that development that often gets left out is that science has to develop an adequate understanding of what it is doing itself, what it's about not in the sense of the subject matter, but what it's about in the sense of what is it actually engaged in and how does it do that. So he talks about this as bringing about a polarization, which is the Gordian knot with which scientific culture is at present struggling, and which it does not yet properly understand. So Hegel is.
Dark One says Karl Popper is also good for philosophy of science. Awesome. All right. Yeah, y'all giving me some homework. Yeah, I definitely have to look into all these folks. Thank you.
Going to help us now to understand for the science of his own time, and perhaps this applies to our understanding in our own time, what this Gordian knot is. So while I do a little bit of erasure and writing things up here, let me tell you the story of the Gordian knot. When you use that expression,
I heard of this story.
It refers to this really intricate knot that was I don't know what it was made of. I'm assuming yarn, because that was a common thing at the time. And this was in ancient Greece. And the story of the Gordian knot concerns Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great is supposed to have run across this knot, and to be able to untie that would actually be quite a feat, not only of patience but of wisdom. And nobody had been able to do it. But how does Alexander untie it? He takes a sword and slices it in half. That's thinking outside the box in a certain way, isn't it? Because you are untying the knot, but you're not untying the knot in the sense that you were supposed to. And so Gordian knot is sort of a byword for a puzzle that is really difficult to solve, perhaps impossible to solve, and which you might solve only by producing some sort of split, some sort of bifurcation. And he talks about this as a polarization that scientific culture has fallen into. So you've got two sides. You've got the one and the other, just so we can stick to the terminology used here. So the one.
Sean says, bear in mind Popper's interpretation of Hegel and Marx is notoriously controversial, but agreed as a philosopher of science, he's very interesting. Okay, interesting. I like to have those different viewpoints on things. That allows you to kind of understand, information better, right? You take a kind of almost like a biased side, not in terms of confirmation bias, but like taking one idea and going as much as you can towards it, and then comparing it to another idea, and being open to like shifting going back and forth and taking from here and there and bringing them together. So I think that's very useful to understand these types of things to get a different viewpoint.
Side boasts of its wealth of material and its intelligibility. Mm-hmm. That means everything is able to be understood. And the other side boasts of immediate rationality and divinity. So what have we got going on here? We've got a lot of content and a lot of form, and then we've got the ones who think that they're getting to the real heart of the matter. We've seen this already with the appeal to intuition. The appeal to intuition can take the form of the beautiful, the true, God, religion, transcendentalism, this notion that, look, you can jangle around all you want with concepts and appearances and discursive knowledge. We're penetrating to the heart of the matter in a way that you can't possibly do, nor can you even understand. You stick in the mud empiricists over here. We're rationalists, by the way. This is something quite different. And so these two sides are kind of fighting with each other. And it makes sense because you can pile up a lot of data, a lot of information, and you can even organize it and curate it. But you can still ask the question, what the hell is the point? What are you actually getting at? What is this really about? And that sometimes seems to require some sort of getting things as a whole. These guys are focusing on the whole, the totality. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, they're reducing it to something, what we've seen is not really deep, it's superficial, something that's in many respects arbitrary. These guys are going about the, workmanlike process of putting things together, but they're losing sight of, as we say, the forest for the trees. Mm. These guys are all forests, these guys are all trees. And he says that this side over here, at least in this paragraph, even if this side is reduced to silence, whether by the force of truth alone or the blustering of the other, because people over here do bluster quite a bit, and even if in respect to fundamentals it feels itself outmatched, it's by no means satisfied regarding the demands. For the demands that science is imposing, this Gordian knot of science, that things make sense, that things be systematized, that things be put into a whole that can not only, contain everything, be completely exhaustive, be comprehensive, but actually make sense of itself in a reflexive way. These guys are claiming, hey, we're doing that and you aren't. And these guys are saying, I can see that that's important, but you guys aren't really doing that. You are making a claim that is, I want to use these exact terms again, these demands are justified but not fulfilled. It's one thing to say that you're going to do something or that the project that you're working on is really an important project, and that can be true. It's a whole other thing to make good at it. And these two sides are left with this split in a kind of scission. He also talks about the silence of this side stemming from the boredom and indifference which tend to result from the continual awakening of expectations through unfulfilled promises. And again, over here, we might think about this as, the big picture meaning. The people that are the ideas men or women who are going to put everything into perspective, they come up with some sort of, here's the idea you got to get. Again, we could say mindfulness.
What's the meaning of
life?
A
decade from now, nobody's going to be talking about mindfulness anymore. It'll be some other trendy thing that's on the scene. And, the mindfulness thing will be just one more branch of the study over here. The problem is these guys never make good. It sounds really cool. It sounds like, yeah, this is going to revolutionize things. This is going to help me fit everything into perspective. But the problem is, who's good at fitting things into perspective? The one who can actually articulate things, the one who actually has some sort of schema, some sort of arrangement, some sort of what Hegel's calling form.
Yeah, that was beautiful. So I kind of got that backwards a little bit. We was talking about the one and the other. Again, this is why it's so great to listen to this, because it's easy to mix things up when you're reading it through. But he really does a great job of parsing these different things and stuff like that. So I wonder if he's going to talk about the Gordian Knot, thing of how you can kind of split this whole complex problem by kind of mixing the two. not in terms of making science more spiritual, but in terms of explaining the spiritual experiences through a scientific lens. And I say that because that might just be with my modern day interpretations of it, because I recently kind of read some great ideas on how a lot of psychology and other type of sociologies and stuff like that are starting to replicate a lot of the experiences and wisdoms that religions had for hundreds of thousands of years. Things like meditation, things like synchronization of movement, things like gratefulness or gratitude, stuff like that. Psychology is finding that these are extremely beneficial. These are very important. But this article, I forgot what it was, what the title of the article was. So I can't link it right now. But the article was talking about how we should actually look to religion to see what to study, right? So instead of starting from scratch with science and saying, okay, what makes humans this, that, and the other, instead look at religion, look at all the religious practices that these different things have, and then study those, right? So we can actually kind of have a jumping off point into how to build that system of understanding. And I think that's kind of a related thing to what Hegel's talking about here, and probably what he's going to talk about. So we'll see. But that'll be next week. And yeah, thanks y'all so much for coming today, for checking this out with me. I might do another stream in a little bit about anarchy, because that's usually what I do on Fridays. I suppose I had done this stream yesterday, but I was really busy. So if I have some time after I've eaten all that stuff, I might do another one about anarchy. But we'll see. But yeah, thanks as always for coming. No, Sean, thank you for coming through for the stream. You all made it much more interesting. I love the engagement. This is why I really want to start streaming, because I love to learn alongside other folks. So thank you for attending, and I hope you get to tune in a future date. So yeah, y'all have a great day, and see ya. Bye bye. Yeah, it is incredibly wordy. It's, it's very fun. All right, see ya.